and the approach to the new generation of LTPs and what they're going to try and achieve. The first session is looking at other perspectives on the subject from those who are not directly involved in LTPs, but whose areas of activities are significant influence and input to them. I'm sad to say that one of the speakers in this session, David Astill from Nottingham City Transport, who was going to give us a bus operator's view, has had to pull out due to immediate concerns within his enterprise. And I was hoping we might bring in an alternative, but he was the only passenger transport operator in the audience today. So unfortunately I couldn't find a substitute, and I had to say that it is quite hard to get bus operators to engage in events which are about general local transport planning rather than bus operators specifically. And that's sad because of the really important relationship between bus services and local transport plans and the benefits to each of being in better liaison. Anyway, we will manage without one today, and I'm now going to hand over to Peter Jones again to chair this first session of the final two.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon again to everybody. We started off today by looking at a broad context of the history, developments and future requirements of LTP, and the DfT outlining how they propose to develop the guidance, which all look very encouraging. We then turned to looking at what are some of the new drivers that might work really around to the same extent in 2009 when the last LTP guidance was prepared, things like levelling up, carbon, etc. And then in the previous session, we heard local authority views on how they were at the moment were tackling the local issues and the role of local transport plans, what they'd like to see in the new guidance and so on. But of course, when it comes down to it, we're very much reliant on the private sector delivering the actual transport services. And so we've got a session now where we're focusing on that. As Peter said, unfortunately, David had to duck out the last minute to do some urgent thing he had to deal with as Managing Director of Nottingham City Transport. But in a sense, if we had to lose one of our speakers, in a sense, we're quite well covered because the government's already produced documents about the bus back better and gear change. So I think there is increasing understanding in central government and also for various reasons, local government have to deal quite a lot with the bus industry. And I think the areas that we do have represented now, the rail, freight logistics, and also shared mobility, are ones perhaps where local authorities have had closer contact, less close contacts rather, with those parts of the industry. So I'm very glad that we've had three speakers who've agreed to come along this afternoon to pick up those aspects. The first one is Mike Keegan, who's Director of Transport Planning and Policy in Great British Railways and has come from a long-term background at TfL, so very much understands the issues at local authority level. My perception is that in the past, local authorities have found it quite frustrating trying to deal with Network Rail and get an involvement, whereas now, as you'll see in a minute, we're in a very different environment with Great British Railways. Mike and his colleagues are very committed to working with local authorities, understanding the importance both of the rail network for local authorities, but also the role of stations and so on. So I'm pleased to hand over to Mike, who's going to say a few words. Thank you, Mike.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here at the session today. As Peter said, it's a really great opportunity to promote and raise the profile of rail and its role in local transport plans. If we just move to the next slide, please. You may be aware of Great British Railways, or should I actually say Great British Railways transition team. This transition team has been set up to create the new Great British Railways organisation, working over the next couple of years, bringing together all the different aspects of the railway industry. I think it's fair to say we're at a critical point in the history of the railway, and we've got a huge opportunity to make meaningful change. So back in May 2021, the Williams-Shapps Plan for Rail was announced that a new single accountable body called Great British Railways will be created to act as what's been known as a guiding mind for the industry. So that plan for rail set out how the future Great British Railways will own the infrastructure, receive the fare revenue, run and plan the network, and set most fares and timetables. Network Rail, the current infrastructure owner, will be absorbed into this new organisation, as will many functions from the Rail Delivery Group and the Department for Transport. Great British Railways transition team is already beginning to bring the industry together in a way that hasn't happened before, and we are overseeing this industry change with some functions already starting to progress. Now, just before I go on, I think it's just worth reflecting just very briefly on GBRTT's purpose, and it's actually very straightforward. So as you can see in this slide here, it's very much about placing customers at the heart of our decision making, creating a simpler railway. That means simpler for people, customers, our teams and others to engage and work together. And we believe that the rail network can be run better for everyone. If we can't make it better, then we might as well pack up. And we're talking here about making it work better for everyone in Britain. So together with the rest of the industry, and I think the word together is also fundamental, we will create, and our mission is to create a simpler, smarter, more sustainable railway that works for customers and supports Britain's growth. Simpler, better, and for everybody. So if we just move on to the next slide. So that's basically our role for the Great British Railways transition team. Now, the massive opportunity we've got here as a new organisation is to create what I've called a win-win for local transport and for rail. The government has set 5 objectives for the railway around as you can see, their customer service, financial sustainability, economic growth, levelling up, and the environment, notably, I suppose, and obviously including contributing to reducing carbon emissions. We recently made a call for evidence, and I think that we had a fantastic response, over 300 responses, and many of which were from local authorities and combined authorities and subnational transport bodies, so people who are very much going to be involved in the development of local transport plans. The opportunity we have is to work together to provide a sort of integrated whole journey approach. So with rail as a sort of key part of that. So the opportunity to better integrate walking, cycling, and local buses to provide an overall more attractive choice for more journeys compared to car use. That would deliver better local outcomes, and it will help us achieve our national objectives for rail. So just looking back at the objectives we've got, a key one you'll see down there, the second one, financial sustainability. So the railway, as you'll appreciate, is under enormous financial pressure at the moment, significantly hit by the pandemic, so we're obviously looking to attract customers back to the railway. That will almost certainly be a more diverse range of customers. It may well be that commuters remain our largest market, but what we've seen since the pandemic is that leisure travel has rebounded, so to speak, more strongly than other sectors. So there's a question here about, to help contribute to our future financial sustainability, how can we appeal to a broader range of people, older people, children, families, disabled people, and so on. And that will certainly involve providing a better travel environment door to door. So therefore including walking, cycling, and other forms of public transport. So that's the win-win opportunity we have. If we just move on to the next slide, I think you'll appreciate that we're building on some really strong commitments that have already been made by the government to better integrate walking, cycling, and other forms of public transport with the rail system. So gear change calls it out, and as well as the government's decarbonising transport strategy, both looking at opportunities to integrate cycling with the railway. I suppose it's sort of pretty obvious but to say that, of course, 100% of people who use the railway arrive by some other mode of travel, a lot of it on foot, of course. So, it's really important to integrate to make conditions better for walking to stations as well as cycling. And of course that means tackling road danger. Quite often in the vicinity of stations there could be high volumes of vehicle movement as well as pedestrian movement, so creating high quality public spaces and so on. If we just move to the next slide, see here the government's commitments to better integrating buses with the railway. So for example, more bus routes serving stations, and providing better information, high quality interchanges, and so on. So, again, we've got sort of really strong commitments here to take forward. And on the next slide, a less interesting, if I could just point out actually a less interesting cover to this particular document, but the National Planning Policy Framework, of course, in its section promoting sustainable transport, sort of sets out the requirements, to identify the impacts of development on the transport system and to plan for that and so on, and to take the opportunity to promote walking, cycling and public transport use through growth. And now, of course, the railway, I mean, this is really, really important for the railway in terms of the fact that it's able to support high density mixed use development. It's able to connect new housing to city centres. It's able to unlock brownfield development and so on. So as the country grows, of course, 10 million more people over the next 30 years, and we need to provide homes and jobs for those people, the railway will be a key part of ensuring that development is sustainable. But of course, not all of those journeys that new population will make will be by rail. So again, those development areas need to have very high quality walking and cycling and local public transport links as well. But nevertheless, rail will be key to that sustainable development pattern. Then I think, lastly, I think it was my last slide now, if we just move on. We've got second to last slide actually, our call for evidence. So I mentioned over 300 stakeholder groups responded to our call for evidence regarding those 5 objectives that the government has set us. We asked stakeholders, did they feel that they were the right objectives, and what experience did they have in sort of delivering those objectives themselves, and what would they want to see from the railway. A report has been published a couple of weeks ago, which is online, and sets out the messages that we heard. We're now, of course, working through that in developing our 30-year strategy for the railway, which has been known as the Whole Industry Strategic Plan, and that will set out the way that we will develop the national railway network to deliver against those objectives or towards those objectives. I've pulled out some of the key things here with regard to integration with local transport. I think that the things there will be well recognised by you: high quality interchange, high quality secure cycle parking and so on, good conditions for walking. I think the last one there is a really important point: the proactive joined up work on transport planning and development and so on, and collaborative working between the railway and partner organisations, local authorities and so on will be critical and really important to ensuring that our strategies are aligned and contribute together to the sustainable economic growth and levelling up and so on, and reducing carbon emissions. So we've just moved to the very last slide, just some sort of practical things which I thought might be worth mentioning. So firstly, in terms of integrating cycling in particular with the railway, as we create Great British Railways, the Great British Railways transition team is identifying opportunities to support active travel. We've done a deep dive again through all the call for evidence responses and pulled out in detail the opportunities to try to better integrate cycling with the railway. And of course, we're talking to Active Travel England and other representatives from that sector. Then, in terms of the guidance, we are working with the Department for Transport's local transport team to help them shape it and to make sure that we've got the best rail relevant areas in there in the guidance. But so before it comes out for consultation. In terms of data and information about the railway, so you might be thinking, well, so where are the busiest stations, and where are the opportunities, and where are the proposed, investment taking place, and so on. We're reviewing what data we have available, and we will make that available either through the DFT or ourselves as best we can to help you or help inform the development of your LTPs. And then lastly, we are going to build on the collaborative work that Network Rail already does with LTAs and so on. The timeline for developing the LTPs coincides with the formation of GBR. So at the moment, Network Rail is the primary interface for LTAs, while GBR is being set up. But I think the simplest thing to say was, hopefully you will have contacts at Network Rail. If in doubt, contact me, and we'll put you in touch with the right people. So that's everything from me, and looking forward to your questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. And as you say, the alignment of timing is quite good. And it's very good to know that you and your colleagues are proactively seeing how you can engage with local authorities and the overlapping components relating to that in the local transport plan. So that's really great. One of the important elements of the rail network is actually to move freight around the country. And it's interesting to see, I think, that national government have now understood that. And there was discussion that during the strikes about the need to prioritise freight traffic so that goods will move around the country without undue delay and so on. So I think at the national level, there is a growing understanding of the importance of freight logistics to the economy and to people's daily lives. I think historically at the local level, it's been a bit more mixed. Those of you who might remember the London Olympics, the original proposals to restrict stopping and loading, etc., in large parts of inner and central London, so that the Olympic family could get from their hotels to the venues in time. There was a famous story about the restrictions originally were quite tight, and then Peter Hendy, the traffic commissioner, got somebody from the brewery industry and got in touch with him and said, "Do you realise that if you impose these restrictions, the pubs will run out of beer within 36 hours?" And he suddenly woke up to the importance of freight. And I think sometimes, even today, people have said, "What about freight?" It tends to be the thing that's often a little bit forgotten. Right down to a micro level, without naming the authority or the street, an area I know reasonably well, where they widen the footways as part of a public realm improvement, and they put loading bay on the footway, which is very nice, outside Marks and Spencer's, except the loading bay was for a standard short vehicle, and they always use an HGV. So technically the HGV was illegal because it was twice the length of the loading bay. Now that's a very technical thing, but it sort of indicates, I think, the lack of perhaps understanding between local authorities and the needs of the freight sector. And so Logistics UK, very pleased to welcome Natalie Chapman, who's head of urban policy, whose remit is to try and get this closer cooperation and understanding, I think. So over to you, Natalie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Peter. And I'm delighted to be joining you all today. It's always a challenge trying to make sure that we bring the freight elements into everything that we're doing with developing local transport plans. What I'll start off just by doing is just give a very brief introduction to Logistics UK for anyone who perhaps is less familiar with us as an organisation. So our mission is to support, shape and stand up for efficient logistics. We are the only business group in the UK that represents all of logistics, so road, rail, sea and air. as well as buyers of freight services such as retailers and manufacturers, whose businesses really do depend on efficient movement of goods. And we also, I'm delighted to say, have lots and lots of local authorities in membership. It's a very strong part of our membership. So your fleet colleagues will operate all sorts of weird and wonderful vehicles, from grass cutting machines, community transport, through to snow ploughs. So we have a really kind of strong part of our membership also looking at the local authority fleet as well. We have just over 19,000 members in the UK, operating about 200,000 HGVs, which is around half of the UK fleet, and about a third of the 4.6 million vans in the UK. So in terms of enabling efficient logistics, and I think this is really the opportunity with local transport plans, what I start off by saying is that the logistics industry plays an indispensable role in servicing our towns and cities, supplying communities and supporting local economies as well. So what's really important is to try and have policies in place which enable the industry to operate as efficiently as possible. So logistics really needs to be considered as an essential part of infrastructure. So, thinking about how we plan for new communities, when we're thinking about broadband and gas and electricity and local schools and hospitals, we also need to think about the logistics demands as well, and ensure that we've got appropriate local and national policies and the right regulatory framework in place to support the crucial role that logistics plays. What I'd say is our members work on very tight margins, typically around 1% to 2%. So as an industry, we're always looking at ways to improve efficiency, such as reducing empty running, ensuring we have more fuel efficient vehicles and driving, retiming deliveries out of congested hours, and so on. And one of our biggest challenges at the moment for our members is around costs. We're seeing spiralling costs, particularly around fuel and wages as well, as we've had a very well documented driver shortage. One of the first things to happen, of course, is wages go up. But the price of forecourt diesel, which is nearly a third of the operating costs of a 44-ton HGV, has gone up by over 30% so far this year. And this impacts on all of us because there's an inherent transport cost in everything that we buy. So these increased costs are going to be hitting our household budgets. And with the cost of living crisis, we're already seeing record levels of inflation, much higher than we've seen for many, many years. So we need to sort of have a thought as well around sort of the impact that those rising costs on logistics will feed through into our household budgets. But one of our biggest priorities as an industry is also around achieving net zero. Something like no is also very high on the priority list for local authorities as well in developing your local transport plans. But this isn't something that we can achieve alone. We need the right regulatory environment and the right infrastructure in place to enable this. So in terms of what would logistics like to see from local transport plans, I think the first point is to recognise the essential role that logistics plays in our local economy and communities. Where we can, try and separate out deliveries and servicing activity from private car use. So some of the nudges that you might be considering to introduce to perhaps deter private car use may, of course, encourage people to shift to walking and cycling public transport, which is a great thing, and I know something that's high on many local authorities' aspirations, but that won't necessarily automatically work for freight. So we need to ensure that we avoid any unintended consequences of things such as increased journey times, and importantly, anything that will reduce journey time reliability, which could lead to inefficiencies and, ironically, lead to us trying to deal with a congestion problem by adding to it, because we end up putting more vehicles on the road because we have the same amount of product to deliver, and our ability to deliver what we can in that timescale is limited. So if it's going to take us longer to do that, we'll end up putting more vehicles on the road. That, of course, increase costs for industry, and as I said, that then filters through to all of us as consumers, but also has a huge impact on emissions and congestion, and ultimately our joint net zero objectives. A little outside of local transport plans, but the planning system is really important, and something I think local transport plans can reflect. We need to make sure we've got a planning system that supports logistics operations and green growth. As I said, new communities will increase demand for logistics. As our populations grow, so does our demand for freight. So we need to plan for it. There's always a huge competition with residential. And the risk is that we then end up pushing logistics sites further and further out of our towns and cities. And that then increases our stem mileage, leading to potentially more vehicles on the road, and making things like the switch to EVs more challenging, if ranges are being stretched. And talking about sort of shifting away to alternatively fueled vehicles and EVs, we also need to make sure we've got plentiful and accessible charging and refueling infrastructure in place to support that transition. Thinking not just about cars when it comes to sort of public charging infrastructure, but also ensuring access is available for larger vehicles. We are starting to see, it's fairly at concept level at the moment, but we are starting to see the development of some electric HGVs. We think it may be different technology at the heavier end of the vehicle market. That's less clear, but certainly for vans and smaller HGVs, particularly those operating in urban environments, we do see electric as the way forward. So we need to make sure we've got the right infrastructure in place, and we're having lots of conversations as well at a national government level about infrastructure, because we also need to consider about charging at depots and the challenges that has with grid supply as well. We also need to think about maximising our existing road network. There's not always much space to build more roads, so we need to ensure that our valuable road space is not allocated away from essential logistics vehicles. We have seen lots of reallocation of road space to encourage and enable more walking and more cycling, which is fantastic and something that Logistics UK absolutely supports in principle. But there are potential unintended consequences if logistics vehicles end up going on larger detours or being sat in traffic for longer. So we need to be considering the impact on logistics and taking a much more holistic approach when we're developing new schemes. And also think about flexibility around delivery times. A lot of deliveries take place in the morning peak because that's when customers want their products. So we work very closely with customers to try and retime. Sometimes, but there's no point in delivering the sandwiches after lunch. So we need to perhaps get them in earlier in the morning. And sometimes that's when we come up against restrictions in terms of delivery times. But if we can deliver out of peak times, moving around in less stop-start traffic, that can hugely improve efficiency, fuel efficiency as well, and potentially reduce the number of vehicles that we can put on the road. Vehicle safety and compliance are strongly regulated through existing regulation. We have things like operator licensing for goods vehicles over 3.5 tonnes. Drivers driving vehicles over 3.5 tonnes are restricted by EU drivers' hours rules, requiring them limiting the amount of hours that they can drive in a shift, in a week, and in a fortnight, and stipulating minimum rest breaks as well. And that's all governed by a system called with the traffic commissioners, who are the kind of judge and jury over our industry. So what we'd like to see is local policies, things done at a very local level, creates some real challenges for our members, because we end up with a kind of fragmentation of regulation. We've got businesses that are operating right across the country. So if we have lots of local areas doing things in a slightly different way, it's a real compliance challenge. And final point, just to finish on, I said about, I mentioned about sort of driver's hours rules, and also the challenges that we've had with recruiting new HGV drivers and retaining the ones that we've got. One of the big barriers is around lorry parking facilities. It's often very difficult to try and provide the right levels of facilities in the right locations. It's often down to local planning decisions. So I know it's something that local transport plans can't necessarily deliver, because it comes down to local planning decisions. But I would really strongly urge you to work with your districts to try and find suitable locations on or close to strategic road network, and just to try and reflect that through in your transport plans. So it's a really important element of the system, and about ensuring safety on our roads as well. So there's a few things that I've been sort of rattling through, and I'm sure we will pick up those and many more other points in the questions. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you. I'm going to pass on to Matt Ledbury in a moment. If we look back, compared with 2009, when the last LTE guidance was produced, I think the big change has been the word sharing. There's very little, I suspect, that thought about that at the policy level then, but now in terms of sharing joint ownership, joint use of cars, the Santander scheme in London, e-bikes schemes and so on, these and e-scooter rather, these are becoming very popular now. And so I'm very glad that Matt's here. He's Senior Policy and Advocacy Officer at CoMoUK, who very much focused on developing this area. So over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you for that introduction and pointing out quite nicely how things have changed since LTP guidance was last done. In many respects, we're almost a world away in terms of our priorities and even in terms of how things are changing in terms of provision. So certainly from a shared transport point of view, we're very keen to make sure that the guidance reflects this. Just first of all, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with CoMoUK, but just to be clear for those of you who aren't, CoMoUK is basically short for Collaborative Mobility. We're a charity and we provide guidance on implementing shared transport. We accredit shared transport operators. We conduct unique research, in particular our annual car club survey and annual bike share survey that track the development both in terms of usage and what the trends are. And we offer a series of networks that are available to operators and local government officers in terms of actually being able to discuss and share information about developing shared transport. So across the board, we try and cover all the areas. In terms of what shared transport is, even that can be open to debate to some extent, but one of the things that makes my role, I think, fairly exciting is the fact that it's a changing area. Obviously, car clubs is the one that people tend to think of in terms of transport for common use. They've been in existence now in this country for between 20 or 30 years in a mainstream way. But more recently, bike share schemes have developed quite a lot in the last decade, also with the inclusion now of e-bikes. In terms of e-scooter, it's the one that's probably become most visible in terms of changes in the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, we've still got this situation where the legal position remains to be clarified, and hopefully it will be later this year. But currently, we have a whole range of schemes around the country where people can use scooters in the same way you can with bike share schemes, and that's the way to use them legally at the moment on our roads, certainly. And we also have things like demand responsive transport buses, which are growing in various areas. And in terms of infrastructure, the concept of mobility hubs, basically places which are clear areas where you can move from one mode of transport to another and become places that are a focus for community activity, both in terms of being able to access transport and in terms of being able to do related things such as socializing or working or hanging out at a cafe or whatever you might want. So in terms of how transport looks at the future, this is the way that may go forward. I would also add as well, while most of what we do is about sharing vehicles one way or another, we do also cover journey share or lift share as well. In terms of where shared transport is going, it's certainly an area that's growing fast. In our last survey on car club use at the end of 2021, we found there'd been a 24% increase in members over the previous 12 months, and we're now at around about 800,000 car club members in the country. Bike share has also been growing as well. One key feature we're finding with bike share was the extent to which it's a catalyst for people to start sharing again, to start cycling again. And we're finding that almost 50% of bike share users were saying that it was bike share that was the catalyst to begin cycling again. So it's not just a question of allowing people to access bikes for particular journeys, but also give them the confidence to actually take it up as a regular pursuit. In terms of the e-scooter sharing, there's currently, I think, around 24,000 e-scooters available now across the country. There's been over 13 million trips done so far, and it's proving to be popular with all ages, and also showing to be effective in terms of displacing car trips and taxi trips as well. The one thing that will show this in more detail is the data that the DfT have done on this, and I'm looking forward to seeing this, as I'm sure some of you are as well. In terms of where shared transport can go, perhaps one of the challenges we have is that unlike documents, unlike cycle use with gear change or bus use with bus back better, we don't have a defining overarching document that's there to champion us at the moment from a national level. It's worth pointing out, though, that the Transport Decarbonisation Plan was quite clear in that shared transport was one of the key ways forward, and one of the pledges in the plan is to support car clubs to go fully zero emission as soon as possible, because it recognised that doing this can help lead the transition towards zero emission vehicles generally by having a means by which people can familiarise themselves with them and try them out. So the direction of support has been shown at a national level. What we need now is to make sure it's actually sewn up within the new guidance. I was having a look at the draft guidance and at the strategic priorities within it. And the three strategic priorities are growing up and levelling the economy, growing and levelling up the economy, get that the right way around, improving transport for the user, and reducing environmental impacts. And shared transport can deliver on all three of those quite clearly. The key issue at the moment is that shared transport is frequently underrepresented in current transport strategies, particularly those that are now several years old. And one of the things I find is that when I look at new transport strategies, the best ones can be really good in terms of recognising what shared transport can do. The worst ones can almost completely ignore it. So by having it properly embedded in the guidance, that to me is one of the key ways we'll get the full benefit from it. If I was going to leave you with any key messages, I think it would be this. It's basically, we mustn't miss the opportunities that shared can provide and end up treating it as marginal, because it's not. In terms of future transport of people, it's basically going to be a mix of shared transport, active transport, public transport and community transport. And that's what the guidance really needs to prioritise and help actively support. And that's what I'm hopefully looking forward to seeing come out of it. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Matt. Very, very clearly set of asks, very clearly represented there. Thank you. You mentioned about behaviour change and the need for evidence on that, and sort of more generally evidence on what works and what doesn't work. And I was thinking back, actually for both other speakers, but first of all, Mike, obviously Matt's reference to mobility hubs. Obviously stations can be an important element of mobility hubs. I mean, is there any thought in your organisation actually of having somewhere where local authorities can go to see good practice or something? This came up this morning about, well, how do we all share the best knowledge? Is there any plan maybe in that area to actually have a place where people can go and see best practice examples that they might be able to think about in their LTPs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I was thinking exactly the same thing, stations, mobility hubs and so on. The Williams Shapps white paper calls out the importance of community rail and community rail partnerships, which can actually even go beyond being a mobility hub to a sort of community hub. So I think that's something which, an idea which we are taking forward. I think an example of good practice, I think, is how what you might call the legacy stations on Crossrail or the Elizabeth line have been developed. So not only made accessible and so on, but also better integrated with the local streets and walking and cycling provision and buses. So on the Crossrail sort of learning website, so to speak, there's a whole set of material there advising on what they would recommend in terms of bringing things together at an early stage of scheme development to bring in walking and cycling improvements.
Okay, but I'm wondering whether that best practice might also be on a page of your website, or when you're talking to DfT about LTPs, that the idea is they will provide some pages of evidence and you can make sure that that best practice from your point of view is
Yes.
incorporated in that. I think
Yeah. I don't know whether it is at the moment, but I'll take that away. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Natalie, I can ask you the same. Oh, sorry, go on, Matt. Go on.
Sorry, just to say, I absolutely agree. I think stations are obviously the perfect place to develop mobility hubs, and obviously some of them have been developing towards that for some years. I think the key thing is I find is when speaking to some rail staff is that there's a tendency to see it largely in terms of providing public transport. And one issue recently that I was discussing was the situation with bikes on rail, and this always, I'm sure you're aware of the challenges that it always brings to some rail companies. But the suggestion that users, particularly commuters, should be encouraged to have a second bike, which they would keep at their destination rail station and use that. My immediate thought was, well, instead of that, why not bring in a good bike share operator? So you can actually have the opportunity for anyone to use a bike at that place or at any other station, not needing to have their own. And if you look at operators like SNCB in Belgium, for example, that's exactly the sort of thing they do. So the good ideas are out there, and I hope that GBR are going to help champion them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think learning from best practice across the world is core to how we take this forward as well. Yes, definitely, Natalie.
Just building on that, I'm going to ask you two related questions, if I may, Natalie. The first is that I think local authorities don't always have an understanding of what the industry is trying to achieve and how they operate in urban areas, etc. And some authorities work very well. So, do you have anything on your website where people can get referred to best practice or something like that?
We do have sort of an urban policy position paper. I'm not sure at the moment if it's on our website. It probably should be if it's not, but something that I have certainly sent to local authorities, because it is a challenge. You're expected to be expert in all these different areas, and the reality is with constrained resources, most local authorities will not have somebody who specialises in freight. If they do, it will probably be part of their job along with something else. The other place I would also advise local authorities to look at is the sub-regional transport bodies. So personally, I've engaged quite closely with Transport East and England's Economic Heartland, and they've been creating freight strategies as well. So the challenge we've got is the resources with so many, I forget the number of local authorities or councils we've got across the country. I'm sure there's somebody that can reel off the figure, but that's an awful lot of direct engagement to do. So if we can try and get the right guidance and messaging in that can help sort of trickle down and be kind of a real resource library, I think, for local authorities to go to. I think that's where there seems to be some huge demand, but I think we can certainly make sure we've got some good information available on our website. I think as we're developing LTPs would be a good way forward.
Yeah, thank you. Nicole mentioned this morning that because of cutbacks at local authorities, a lot of skills have been lost, and what the department is trying to do is to put those back in at the sub-regional level. So that they're there for a collection of local authorities. And as you say, maybe that's a good place for these things, maybe seen as a bit more specialist, to put the information and skills there so that they can then be shared with individual local authorities in that sub-region.
Yeah, and I would also add to that as well, as I was saying earlier, we our members operate nationally, internationally. They don't look at borders and boundaries. So we need to make sure that we've got really good integration between neighbouring authorities. And so actually with the sub-regional transport bodies, they're looking at a much more strategic approach for a whole kind of region. So from a logistics point of view, that's a really, really helpful way forward, rather than each authority doing similar but slightly different approaches, which creates a real complicated regulatory environment for our members to operate in.
Okay, thank you. I'm very conscious of time, and I know Peter was suggesting. Peter, do you think we ought to call it to a close now to stick to time, or go on a few more minutes, or would you?
If you'd like to.
Okay. Right.
A couple of interesting questions.
Is there one you want to ask then, Peter, or draw on?
Looking at the chat, have you had a look to see what's on here?
I have. Yeah. Have you got one you'd like to pick out? If not, I will.
The interesting one about for Matt Ledbury particularly, and possibly to do for you, Mike, is about the way we actually incentivize shared use of cars, with changing car parking charges, etc. I don't know if that would apply at rail stations, but it could do, couldn't it? And it ought to apply in other contexts match, shouldn't it?
From my point of view, yes, absolutely yes. The situation we have with residential parking standards is one of the biggest problems, in that this tendency, which the volume house builders love to push, the idea that the more parking spaces, the better. And all we're doing is just locking in car dependency for the future, which is totally nonsensical. And also from the point of view that the best time to change people's behaviour is when they have a major change in their life. And obviously moving home is one of them. So yes, they certainly, I would like to see the standards lowered more. And one thing I was pleased to see from the draft guidance is this idea that there's got to be a closer link between transport policy and local plans. And this has often been a major failing, as though somehow transport is just something that you supply into a local development. That, you know, if we're going to make these things work, we have to actually integrate them properly and not see them as being completely separate. And if I can just add the bit in the chat that was brought up, which I will highlight, is it correct that one car club car replaces up to 20 private cars? And the answer is yes. That's what our research has basically found in terms of in terms of our users. That when you take into account that cars that people decide not to buy because they've joined a car club, or they've got rid of second cars, or even their first cars in some cases as well, it starts to make a significant difference in terms of actually shifting away from car ownership. So in terms of in the context of parking standards and development, is exactly the sort of thing that should be promoted more in new developments, is by having less parking space and more communal provision. And if anyone is interested, we've just put out a new report at CoMoUK on the transport and new developments, and it's available on our website.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And just to tie in Natalie's perspective in this, I was thinking at stations and car parks and so on. Of course, there've also been experiments putting lockers there, haven't there, for people to be able to pick up deliveries there rather than having to go to their homes or something, which again is perhaps a way of increasing efficiency in the industry and reducing mileage and so on. So I think there are various times there that could be brought together, and hopefully the new way we're framing the LTP and thinking much more strategically and collaboratively, we will get more of these win-wins, I think, hopefully.
Yeah. And Peter,
so I'd like to thank to Matt, Natalie and Mike very much indeed for coming along this afternoon. You know, none of this would work on the ground without you and your colleagues you represent. So thank you very much for coming along. And I'll hand over to Peter now, who's going to wrap up and take us into the next session, I think. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Peter, and your panelists. That was excellent, and another dimension to our discussions. It's actually now, sadly, the last session coming up, and this will just give the chance for some final reflections and perspectives to be added by a group of lively thinkers we've put together to perhaps look at what we've been discussing in a general way, with some of their own thoughts on where it leaves us. Before that, I'll have to pause very slightly to allow my colleagues to bring the new people into the virtual studio. So it'll be about a couple of minutes, and then I'll pick up for the final session.